please like, share, and subscribe. Ed Kemper was a boy who grew too quickly for the world around him. He came into this life in Burbank, California in December of 1948, born into a house already splintering under the weight of disappointment. His father, a World War II veteran, carried the disillusionment of a man who had seen death and returned to the quiet suburbs only to feel irrelevant. His mother, Clarnell, carried her own rage like a weapon, directing it at the son who reminded her of everything she claimed to hate about men. Even as a child he was different. He was taller than the rest, awkward in his body and sharper in his thoughts. When the other boys played games, Ed retreated into fantasies, not the harmless kind of imagination but one's dark, distorted, and violent. He would bury the family's pet cat alive just to feel the control of life and death. Later, he confessed he killed another cat with a knife, dismembering it afterward. The neighborhood didn't see these signs, but the shadows were there from the beginning. Ed Kemper was 14 when he stood 6 feet 4 inches tall, already a looming presence. But inside, he was still the bruised boy who could never win his mother's approval. She belittled him, kept him locked in the basement at night, telling him she didn't trust him around his sisters. She whispered that no woman would ever love him, that he was destined to fail. Those words cut deeper than any knife he would later wield. By 1964, at the age of 15, the resentment, the confusion, and the hunger for power boiled over. He was sent to live with his grandparents on a ranch in North Fork, California. His grandfather was aging, frail, a man who represented fading authority. His grandmother, stern and quick with criticism, became the next stand-in for his mother. On August 27, 1964, in a fit of rage, Ed picked up a rifle and shot his grandmother in the kitchen. When his grandfather returned from the store, Ed shot him too, not out of hatred but, as he later explained, so the old man would not have to discover the body of his wife. At 15, he called his mother and confessed. She urged him to contact the police. He waited, calm, until they arrived. When questioned, he said he just wanted to see what it felt like. The courts declared him insane and sent him to Atascadero State Hospital, a secure psychiatric facility. There, among men who had committed horrors of their own, the young giant listened, studied, absorbed. He became a model patient, soaking in psychiatric knowledge. He even assisted in administering psychological tests to other inmates. He learned the language of madness, the words that would one day help him manipulate psychiatrists into believing he was safe. In 1969, at 21 years old, Ed was released. His doctors declared him rehabilitated. The parole board agreed. They sent him back into the world, back into the arms of the very woman who had scarred him, his mother. Santa Cruz, California, was a city with sunshine on its beaches and students thumbing rides along Pacific highways. Hitchhiking was a way of life in the early 1970s, and for young women it carried a freedom that felt modern, liberating. For Ed Kemper, it offered something else, opportunity. He bought a car and began practicing the ritual. He would pick up hitchhikers, drive them safely to their destination and let them go. Over 100 rides without harm. But each trip, he rehearsed. Each turn of the wheel was a dress rehearsal for what would come. He was studying their trust, their body language, and his own ability to conceal his intentions. In May of 1972, rehearsal turned into performance. Mary Ann Pesce and Anita Luchessa, two bright young students, accepted a ride from the towering man with a soft voice. They never made it to their campus. Ed drove them to a secluded area, and there, he ended their lives. Their disappearance was a mystery to their classmates, but for Ed, it was a release. The first time his fantasies took shape in reality. Over the following year, 6 more young women would fall victim. He picked them up near the University of California, Santa Cruz. Women like Cindy Shaw, Rosalind Thorpe, and Alice Liu. Each time, he refined his methods. Each time, he grew more confident. And each time, he returned to the house he shared with his mother, where the trophies of his violence were hidden, and his mother remained oblivious. By then, Ed stood 6'9", over 250 pounds, a giant but one who knew how to shrink himself into a quiet presence. Police never suspected him. He even frequented the jury room, a local bar favored by off-duty cops. They knew him as Big Ed, the gentle giant who enjoyed conversation. He listened to them discuss the investigation into the Coed Killer, not knowing that the man they confided in was the very monster they hunted. But for Ed Kemper, it was never just about strangers. The hatred that drove him was rooted in his mother. No woman will ever love you. You're destined to fail. Clarnell Strandberg mocked him, belittled him, tore at his self-worth daily. On Good Friday of 1973, after a night of drinking and rage, he finally turned on her. In her bedroom as she slept, he struck her with a claw hammer, and then cut her throat. Later, he said he wanted to silence the mocking voice once and for all. Afterward, he called over her friend Sally Hallett, and ended her life as well. When the deed was done, Ed drove east, away from the coast, away from the bodies. He carried with him weapons and ammunition, perhaps imagining a final confrontation. He reached Pueblo, Colorado, more than 1,000 miles from Santa Cruz. There, in a small phone booth, he dialed the police. His first call was brushed off as a prank, his second was more direct. He asked for an officer he knew, and when they arrived, he confessed. Calmly, clearly, he detailed the murders of his mother, her friend, and the 6 young women before them. He described his methods with the detached precision of a man explaining how to fix a machine. The detectives listened, horrified, as the story unfolded. In court, Ed Kemper pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. The jury didn't agree. They convicted him on 8 counts of first-degree murder. The sentence, life imprisonment, to be served at California Medical Facility in Vacaville. Behind bars, Ed Kemper became a study subject, a resource for FBI profilers like John Douglas and Robert Ressler. They interviewed him at length, using his case to refine their understanding of serial offenders. He spoke openly, even eagerly, about his crimes. He explained the fantasies, the urges, the resentments, and the methods. He became a cautionary tale taught in classrooms and training programs across the country. In prison, Ed was not the monster hiding in shadows. He was the cooperative inmate, polite with staff, even recording hundreds of hours of audiobooks for the blind. He read novels into tape recorders, his deep voice becoming familiar to people who never knew the man behind it. For some, his voice carried stories of adventure and hope. For those who knew his history, it carried only dread. But prison life also meant facing the parole board. In 1979, he attended his first hearing. He was denied. Again in 1980, 1985, and onward, he stood before panels of officials who listened to his rehearsed remorse and denied him freedom. By the 1990s, Ed himself admitted he was better off inside. He told interviewers that he was not fit for release, that the risk of his urges returning was too great. His parole hearings became routine denials. In 2024, the parole board reviewed his case again. By then, he was 75 years old, confined to a wheelchair, suffering from diabetes and other health conditions. Still, a psychiatric evaluation declared him high risk for reoffending. The board denied him once more, extending his incarceration until at least 2031. At that age, the likelihood of his ever stepping outside prison walls again is almost non-existent. The story of Ed Kemper is not just about a killer. It is about the failure of systems meant to protect society, about the dangers of underestimating intelligence wrapped in a soft-spoken voice, and about the scars left on families who never saw their daughters return home. Each victim had a name, a story, a family who loved them: Mary Ann, Anita, Cindy, Rosalind, Alice, and more. Their lives were cut short, their futures stolen. Ed Kemper's story is known because of the scale of his crimes and his willingness to talk. But it is their stories that matter most. Today, Ed Kemper remains behind bars in Vacaville, serving life sentences he will never outlive. He sits in his wheelchair, the same deep voice still intact, but the world beyond prison walls has moved on without him. His name lingers in documentaries, in training manuals, in the dark corners of criminal lore. But the echo of his crimes is not his legacy alone. It is the grief of families, the cautionary tale for psychiatry, and the reminder that monsters sometimes walk in daylight wearing a smile. And so Ed Kemper, the so-called co-ed killer, waits out his days in a cell, a giant trapped by the weight of his own choices, knowing that no parole board will ever open the gates for him again. Please like, share, and subscribe.